Okay, here we go. This is my Alpha CNC machine from ShopBot, and I'm cutting out this pattern which I drew in Illustrator. I pretty much lay out most of my ideas in Illustrator, and then I transpose them into cut paths using Vectrix. And I'm using 1/2 inch Baltic birch plywood. And I'm doing the bones for this toolbox, and this was 2 full sheets of plywood. You could see here. And I was only going to make this once. Of course, I still have the pattern, but the pattern went together tightly. I should have offset it a little bit by maybe 2,000, so 3,000, so that I didn't have to work so hard assembling this. If you notice this piece, I try it, I put it on the cement floor, and then I finally flip it over and I get it to finally stick. And now this is the assembly that's going to carry the short drawers and the middle drawer. And I had a lot of hammering to do. I used first one hammer, then I went and got a blacksmith hammer. It's a 2-pound or 3-pound hammer, and then it started going together a little bit easier with the heavier hammer. And I knew I was going to have trouble right now trying to get all those tabs in at the same time. I got them started, and then I used these screws, which I just used to pull in. I was having the problem where I was banging one in, the other one was popping out. And with this against the concrete floor, I was able to really bang all that in properly. So that was a good one. But if I had to offer this kit or whatever to anybody, if anybody wanted to use this file, you'd have to make sure you do an offset, do a test cut. But I just cut the whole thing and said if it's tight, I'll just sand it and fit it together. And I'll tell you what, it was a real pain in the ass to get it to fit together. But I did, which is why I sped this all up so much, because I was really banging the whole time. And I did not have a plan to cover the back. I was just going to put a 1/4 inch sheet of plywood. But I thought maybe if the drawers bang against the back, that plywood ultimately would start to bang off. And so that's why I went with these pieces filled in. Wasn't originally going to put them. And, most projects I improvise as I go along. I have a basic idea. And now this is the bottom, knowing this is going to end up ultimately getting very heavy. I put those 3 ribs on the bottom, and now you realize this is going to be the veneer, which is 1/4 inch. So with the 1/2 inch body all on the CNC machine and the 1/4 inch on top of everything, we ended up at 3/4 everywhere. And I'm using Type-On 3, which Jackman turned me on to Type-On 3, and I actually really like it. I never gave it a chance just because I was always so used to using the yellow stuff, and it really dries nice and hard. Kind of use it as a little bit of filler from time to time, and it dries a dark brown, more closer to a wood tone than the yellow. And now this is my first piece of laminate starting on the back, furthest away to what you're going to see last. Rather, what you're going to see first is what you add last. And putting this on, and wherever the end grain intersects or comes together, I put a little chunk of hardwood in between. So you have the flat back, and I used that edge to go forward from, and now I fill in that little empty square on the corner with a piece of hardwood oak. And this is all just red oak from Home Depot, nothing special. I didn't want to have to get, I get lazy when it comes to something like this. I know there's going to be a ton of material that I'm going to need, so I just assume I'll just use the overly dried stuff from Home Depot. It's already typically always the same thickness. I don't have to mill it up, and it'll all be generally consistent. I have done projects where I started with fresh milled wood, saw marks and stuff, but then this would be a little bit easier, just working with the Home Depot stuff. So I got a sheet of 1/4 inch plywood with a red oak veneer. And now I'm adding all that. So you'll notice again, just to repeat myself, I filled in that corner with a little 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch stick of oak where the 2 1/4 inch plies come together. Oh, sorry, I'm yawning. It's a long day. It's on Sunday. And now this is the beginning of the face boards. And I was going to put the veneer there, the 1/4 inch plywood, but I was like, you know what, let me just go with the oak itself, because it's a small enough piece I could have milled. I milled up, of course. I milled it. You saw me mill it. But now all the wood facing forward is going to be from the same batch of wood that I got at Home Depot. And I glue on whatever I can and clamp it. And then in between where I could no longer clamp it, I use the pin nailer. And the reason I don't use the pin nailer everywhere is because even though I'm doing my best to make sure all this is nice and flat, I'm still going to glue it all together, and there'll still be strips that meet other strips either higher or lower. And I want to be able to use a hand plane on the outside edge or wherever. And so I'm trying to use as little pins as possible, but here I had no choice. If this was a little bit more of a critical job, I probably would have taped all that face frame on and then let it dry, but I wanted to keep moving through. And ultimately, you'll see me use a big sanding block to sand everything down. And the sanding block works on the pin nails as well. This is the top. Now, I didn't miter anything on the front. I just let it go run long in certain spots and trap other pieces. Here, I'm mitering the top edge because I didn't want to see any end grain facing out or sideways. And that's why I'm doing that. Still with the Type Bond 3, which is really nice. Like I said, it dries with a dark color, more closer to a wood tone. And now this is my big sanding block that I'm using. It's a full sheet on a piece of scrap plywood. And I'm using it to just level out all that those areas there. A little secret that nobody has picked up on yet is that third rib up, like right, that third longest one up, has a big dip in it. You can't see it on camera, but in reality you could see it. So ultimately I made the face frames of the drawers to match the curve. I couldn't get rid of the curve. I thought maybe I could glue a piece of steel up underneath it with an opposite bow. I couldn't get rid of it. The piece of metal didn't stay on with the glue I used. It bounced out. So I ultimately just made the drawer face curved, so the gap is consistent. But if you look down at it, in the middle it's like 3 and I don't know, maybe it's like 3 3/4, but on each edge it's 4 inches. So it's a pretty considerable dip. And now here I'm doing finger joints, just using the saw blade width. Honestly, I did that because I'm lazy and I don't want to have to change the blade. If I had 2 table saws in there, I might have one set up with a wider blade. When you do these tiny finger joints, they have a tendency to have a lot of friction in them. This is me experimenting with my new 360 camera, Insta360 3D camera. And so the finger joints, using the width of the blade, gives you a lot of friction trying to put them together. You see how hard I'm banging them together. There was no room for glue. The minute I put glue on one test joint, there was no way I could bang them together. So I decided to just soak each joint with CA glue, and that was pretty good. I'd soaked the inside as well. And it worked out good. Worked out really good. It's messy, though, to clean it up later. And lots of finger joints. Like so many. These are the drawers now. And I thought at first the drawers were going to fit into the cubbies perfectly, with just a little bit of tolerance for the air to suck in and out. And I also like the idea of being able to pull the drawer out and bring it over to the work if I was going to be working on the lathe, and keeping the drawers as trays, which was something I could still do even though I have the drawer slides on them. So what I decided to do was use the full 3/4 wood, so you could see a good thick edge when you open the drawer because of the scale. And then dado room for the sliders. Just a little redundancy. And I just bought that Porta cable 3x21 sander for $20 at a local flea market. I have one, but it stopped working. The belt or whatever inside is broken. So I saw it and I was like, oh, let me buy it. And it was brand new, hardly used rather. So it works perfect. And it still has the belt that it came with on it. Works good. So getting rid of all those Finger joints, I always make them proud, so when you sand them, they look nice. It's really important, and I love that. Love that advice. Now, this is something that I knew was going to get everybody upset. For time, I had a really stressful week last week as far as just scheduling, and I could have data routed the bottom of every one of these just so that that shelf bottom sits inside something. But if you could imagine the shear strength, that is a very tight fit, and the shear strength of that glue holding it in, okay, maybe in 40, 50 years from now it might fall out. Especially if I follow it up with a couple of pin nails, that is never coming out of there. I don't care who you are or what you think you know. That is never coming out of there. And I have the opportunity of the red felt to clean up whatever gaps. Then, by the way, there were no gaps. It was a perfect fit. And I made sure that they snugged in there. And now I'm just leveling the top. Even though I did the finger joints and everything, some sides are slightly higher than other sides. And now that I don't need to worry, I want the drawer to float inside the airspace. I don't have to have the top of the drawers becoming the rails or the sliders. So it's going to be floating, hanging on the drawer slides. Now this is me putting the drawer slides in for the first time. Oh, by the way, Tony Rouleau made that beautiful hand plane. You find that Hillview wood and metal. Now this is how I do drawer slides. I just plop them down at the bottom of my pocket. If I have a bottom. If I don't have a bottom and they're suspended in space, I usually make a rack, and I use that same rack for one side, flop it around, and use it on the other side. That will suspend them. So now here I'm making the pocket that is needed to create the space for the sliders. I put the 2 sliders in each cubby hole and then measured left to right and then centered it on there, and then that's how much I knew I needed to remove. And the bottom 3 are the same, and the top 6 are the same, and the one in the middle, of course, is just on its own. So that's why once I knew what I needed, I just set the saw and did the rip for the next 2. And by the way, that's the cubby hole where the top of that cubby, which would be the bottom of the top longest drawer, is dipped down, and you could kind of see it in this shot, although everything's bent from this camera view. But that's how I do the sliders. I put in the sliders, and then I make sure there's enough room above and below for the drawer itself. I'll throw some spacer sticks under the drawer and then slowly pull out the sliders and add them, screw them to the drawer itself as I'm pulling them out. I'll do left and right, pull it out a little further, left and right, pull it out a little further, all the while making sure that the drawer is riding on the spacer sticks that I put underneath it. Now I glued those in. I followed it up with screws later, but I didn't show it. And I couldn't get deep in there. I only just put screws in the front of them because of that pocket those cubbies are too deep, too shallow. And so here I am cutting out the railings, the space in the drawers for the railings, or for the sliders, I should say. Now, I knew there was some traditional methods here that were going to get the average woodworker upset, but I don't care. Creates more engagement. So now underneath there I have the spacer sticks. I pulled the drawer up there. So those 1/8 inch spacer sticks make sure that the drawer floats 1/8 inch above as I put the screws in. And it took some time to get the drawers all adjusted to make sure that the return slow closers are actually pulling it in. Sometimes if the drawer's too skinny, you got to space it. If it's too tight, you got to cut it, trim it, a hair's width. 10th thou, you got to cut off, throw it back through the saw blade on one side. Now this is the top, and I was just missing a couple of pieces of footage to really pull this together cohesively because it looks like I'm making another drawer. Soaking it with thin CA glue, which the first shot I showed you was medium. The thin really soaks in really nice. And using my Suzanne hand saw there, making everything nice and flat. Now this is a few hours later. I don't want to get any of that glue on the teeth of the saw, of course. So everything's nice and dried. That's the fastest way to ruin a saw, is to cut, especially CA glue, cut a joint that is still wet. Now this is the top. That's a 1/2 inch panel that fits directly inside, adding it to a Oh, my cats are meowing. And adding it to a 1/4 inch. And now I'm making sure it fits directly inside the frame. And I bang it all in. And then what I don't show is I just squirt CA glue down the whole sides while it's in place. Considering the top has veneer on it, I didn't want to get it all muddied up with the glue. With the brown glue. And I also put glue here, so now this little step inside has glue facing up under the lid and then into the joint in every direction. So this is pretty secure. With the CA glue squirted in the joint, and then this and this and this, it's all glued in. And you know, it's funny, everyone gets all uptight when they don't see every single aspect that I've done, or they assume that this is for me. I said it in one of the comments on the video. This is for me, so I can cut corners and know that I could fix it later if something goes wrong. I'm under certain time constraints. I wanted to make sure I had this video out for this weekend. So even though I look like I have all the time in the world, when I set myself up against the timeline, I have to try and make sure I adhere to it. Worst case scenario, if I wasn't ready, I'd just release the video following weekend, but I was so close, I just wanted to make sure I got it. Now these are all the drawer fronts. And the only reason I needed a drawer front was because I had to hide the sliders on the sides of the drawers. And maybe there's a different way, but this is the way I did it because I'm kind of used to doing drawer fronts for the kitchen stuff that I used to do, which I don't do anymore. And everybody was thrown off by the Bondo. The Bondo dries very quickly, which is the main reason I'm using Bondo. You could put it on there, level the drawer faces so that you get the exact gap you want everywhere, and also have it as proud or as shallow as you want it each time, and the Bondo starts to cure. You'll see I get these 2 drawer faces on before I try the 3rd attempt for the 3rd drawer face, and the Bondo's already cured. So it just gets harder and harder over the next few minutes to cure it. So I gotta wait. I mix up another batch, and then I start putting in all the other drawer faces. All the while using spacers and making sure that they land nice and centered with that air gap. Now, at this point, that air gap, for me, I'm not that precise as some of the guys on YouTube. For me, that's a feeling. I'm looking at it. I'm looking for the feeling. If anything looks a little bigger or smaller, you know, at this point, what could you do? You could put a thin layer on if you have a gap that's too big and not tell anybody and nobody would know. And if the gap is too small, you could throw it back on the saw and just slightly trim it or sand it. And now I'm just using Total Boat. I like satin finish on everything. So I give it 1 wet coat and make sure the drips are all gone. And then in the morning, I lightly sand it and then rub it with a wet rag, wet with the varnish. I think this is spar varnish. I keep calling it polyurethane, but it's like a spar varnish satin. And I know the red felt is going in the drawers, so I only paint up to what I need to paint up to. And I know it's kind of blasphemy painting this without taking it apart, but then again, in the next morning, I pulled all the drawers out and painted what you couldn't see. But I just, for the sake of the video, I don't want to get too uptight about it. Now that's an ice pick where I pulled the tip and bent it completely back around so I can get inside these drawers. So I'm pushing, when you see me pushing on the drawer with the ice pick, I'm pushing on a little elbow. Now all the hardware is from Gerstner. I keep adding the wrong letter in there. Gerstner. It's Gerstner. They make the famous machine toolboxes, and I don't have an official branding deal with them, but I did buy all the hardware from them, and they asked me, once they saw my name in their product list, they asked me if I would put a link in my website or in this video for their website, of course. And using number 90 spray glue, I'm kind of, again, just rushing through this a little bit. This mirror is also from the Gerstner catalog. And the real way is to make sure both those sides are fairly dry. It's at least tacky, and then they'll stay together forever. I had to keep burnishing down some of it because I was kind of moving too quickly, putting it back onto itself while it was wet. But ultimately it will stick. And these came with these little tiny nails. I was afraid I was going to break the mirror. but we made it through to the other side. And now just cutting more red felt, and you'll notice that long ruler is a Starrett ruler. Starrett makes a lot of high-end type measuring and rulering devices, but they also make some day-to-day shop stuff like aluminum rulers and triangles and stuff. For like mundane shop tasks, not quite as precise. And just making sure that these go everywhere. I was real excited to see what the lid looked like. And you notice I made the lid have a lip come up just so it would locate itself. I always like, if two surfaces come together, I like that to be a lip. So they don't get, if I was going to shove the box on the table and slide it, and if you push on the top of the box and you don't have that lid to help secure the lid, keep it in place, it might break off. And that's a stupid example, but the idea that it just stays in place is something that I like. Now this is the hardware from Gerstner. These are intended for toolboxes that are 50% smaller than these. So 2 of those should hold open the lid for your typical size machinist box, but I put on 4 and I didn't trust it. I could have let it go, but I was afraid I was going to pull those screws or bend the hinges. That top lid ended up becoming obviously quite heavy. Now these are the hardware latches that you can get from them. If you actually have a Gerstner box and you're trying to restore it, you could buy Gerstner clips with their branding on them. But they only sell them to somebody that can show that they actually have a box, because they said people have tried to sell knockoffs. So they won't sell you the clips unless you could show them that you have a toolbox. I think it's kind of more of a honor system. Now, I don't know, these are corner protectors? Somebody asked me what they were called in the comments. Now, this was a real funny one. This really got everybody confused. So the draw faces right now are glued on with Bondo. And I want to make sure that right at the draw pull, there's security to the drawer itself. So I put a screw deep through the face into the drawer, the front part of the drawer. And with these little handles from Gerstner, that little collar covers up that. I could screw them in from the back to the front, but this was just a convenient way for me to do it. And screwing those handles into oak was difficult, so that's why I put on a glove with like rubber padding. The handles, I think, will probably bend completely off if I tried to lift this box. This box is so heavy. For me to lift up one side took a considerable amount of effort. Now you see those slow closers, got those at Home Depot. And I half at Home Depot, half at Lowe's, so they were 2 different brands, but they were the same size. And they both seemed to work exactly the same. I needed 10 sets of sliders. One place had 8, one place had 2 sets. And I'm really proud of this. This really came out good. Like I said, even though I cut some corners and the average tense woodworker probably wouldn't agree with some of my methods. And don't forget that CNC box is buried in all of that. And that was my bones. It was a way for me to start. Nice, square, straight computer precision. And then I can have fun with traditional woodworking techniques on top of that. And this is my branding. That's just a little V-bit I got on Amazon with I think it was like a 2,000 step over, running at a 1/2 inch a minute, 1/10,000th of an inch deep cut. VHB tape. I was going to drill and put screw holes in it, and I was like, you know what, maybe I might not like where I put them, so I'm going to just VHB it. If I ever had to take it off, I could just heat it up with a heat gun and just pull it off. Now I'm using actually my calipers to make sure I'm in the right spot for reels. Just put a little mark on the wood with the forks, which is, I know it's against the machinist rules, but I'm a YouTuber, not a machinist. Now I'm really proud of this kit, and I'm really happy that I have a location to put all my fancy tools that I get from these guys. So Starrett, thank you. Gerstner, thank you. Me having a little animation. Frank Hallworth, fun. I'm sure he would have done a better job. And it's funny, every time people see me walk into the frame, they're like, whoa, that's so big, because the Instagram post I put up. And just going through, I put some more tools in the drawers tonight, some of my non-Starrett stuff. You see my Tony Rouleau level and hand plane there. Thanks, Tony. And that's my little hammer I got from Chicago. Thanks, brother. And that's the drawer just for the razor blade. And somebody in the comments said I should have put soap and coffee in it too. I missed an opportunity. I really did. I forgot all about it. And this was a good one, and people are really responding to it. So thank you. I hope I showed some techniques that the garage woodworker could emulate. And again, all the wood is from Home Depot. The plywood I buy from a supplier because it's the multi-layer, like a 9-layer. But you'll notice none of the plywood actually shows anywhere. It's all oak. So thank you, Patreon. I really appreciate it. And guys, thank you all very, very much. Ultimately, this was about 47.5 inches wide by 30 inches high by about 17 inches deep. And if anybody wants that file, just email me at jimmyduresta@mac.com and I'll send it over to you to start to make your own box. Thanks, guys.